So the book was published by Oxford University Press, and it's still available for order at the OUP website or on Amazon. If anyone wants the link, I can share it with you all during the Q&A session. So for now, let me start by sharing with you the cover, which I'm in love with, but of course I'm biased. So here is the cover. People have been asking me where this photo was taken, but the cover image is not a photo. It's actually a painting by a Kurdish painter from Turkey, İhsan Oturmak. And it fits really well with the book's main theme, as the book puts at its center civil Friday prayers, Sivil Cuma namazları in Turkish, which resembled this painting pretty closely, as I will show you in the next slide. So, for example, these two photos were taken during Civil Friday prayers in Diyarbakir, a majority Kurdish city in southeastern Anatolia, in 2012. So I guess the resemblance to the cover art is quite clear now. So what were the Civil Friday prayers and how did they inform the research that gave birth to this book? Civil Friday prayers were initiated in 2011 as acts of civil disobedience by some Kurdish clerics who demanded the right to be able to give the Friday sermons in Kurdish, which was and still is prohibited in Turkey. For example, in this photo, the sign on the right reads, "Those who deny our language cannot teach us our religion." These prayers emerged in the midst of a period when both the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, and the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, highlighted Muslim fraternity as a remedy to the 4-decade-long armed conflict between the PKK and the Turkish armed forces. In this narrative, Sunni Islam was presented as an overarching supranational identity that could surpass the ethnic divisions between the majority Sunni Muslim Turks and Kurds. Civil Friday prayers challenged the government's authority both politically and religiously. Politically because the sermon was given in Kurdish, religiously because they were held out in the streets rather than in state-run mosques, and note that in Turkey, all mosques are state-run. And the Kurdish clerics, the meles, prepared their own sermons rather than reading the text prepared by the Presidency of Religious Affairs, Diyanet in Turkish. And all the Friday sermons are usually prepared by the Diyanet in general. So during the 2 years they were held, the Civil Friday prayers became quite widespread in most Kurdish majority cities in eastern and southeastern Anatolia. At their peak, they attracted around 5,000 people in Diyarbakir. Aiming to highlight the ban on Kurdish sermons in particular and the limitations on the Kurdish language in general, they drew attention to the assimilation of Kurds in Turkey. And most importantly, along with other factors, they played an important role in forcing the state to give de facto permission to sermons in Kurdish, if not de jure. So intrigued by the Civil Friday prayers, in this book, I focus on the ambivalent role Sunni Islam has played in Turkey's Kurdish conflict, both as a conflict resolution tool and as a tool of resistance. Although the Kurdish conflict has historically been characterized by a secular nationalist ideology, both on the side of the PKK and on the side of the Turkish state, since the 1980s, different governments have at times resorted to religion to subdue Kurdish nationalism. However, none had advocated Muslim fraternity as strongly as the AKP governments have. Moreover, never before did the secular PKK with Marxist origins display as positive a stance toward Islam as it has during the AKP rule. Especially during the peace talks that took place between 2012 and 2015, the role of religion has become so pronounced in the conflict that both Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the leader of the AKP, and Abdullah Öcalan, the imprisoned leader of the PKK, went on to cite the same hadith, Prophet Muhammad's sayings, to emphasize Muslim unity and solidarity. Yet, in the summer of 2015, the ceasefire was broken, and in January 2016, Erdogan declared that the peace process is over for good. Since then, clashes have resumed, thousands of people have died, and thousands have been internally displaced. And here you see a quote from then Prime Minister of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, which he said at an election rally in Diyarbakir in 2011. And he says, "We are brothers since time immemorial, and we will be so forever. The Jemaat in Diyarbakir's great mosque pray towards the same direction as those in Istanbul's Süleymaniye Mosque. See, our Qibla is one and the same. Is there any difference here? No, none." And in 2013, you see Abdullah Öcalan, the jailed leader of the PKK, say Turkish people should know that their 1,000-year coexistence with Kurds under the banner of Islam rests on the principles of fraternity and solidarity. So here we see attempts by both to highlight Islam as a unifying common element. So against this background, I inquire why Muslim fraternity has not resonated well among Sunni Turks and Kurds, using the Kurdish case as an opportunity to explore the intricate relationship between religion, ethnicity, and nationalism. I scrutinize the role of religion in ethnic conflicts and ask, how do religious, ethnic, and national identities diverge and converge in religiously homogeneous ethnic conflicts? Is it possible for religion to act as a conflict resolution tool? Why or why not? More specifically, why is it that despite the global increase in the importance of religion and despite the changing stances of the Turkish state and the Kurdish movement, the two parties have failed to unite under the banner of Islam? In search for answers to these questions, I take the reader on a journey into the inner circles of religious elites from different backgrounds: non-state-appointed local Kurdish mellahs, state-appointed Kurdish and Turkish imams, heads of religious non-governmental organizations, members of religious orders, and pious politicians. I rely mainly on participant observation in Friday prayers, systematic analysis of newspapers and politicians' speeches, especially those of Erdogan, and 62 interviews conducted over the course of a year between June 2012 and June 2013 in 3 different cities, Istanbul and the majority Kurdish Diyarbakir and Batman. And in case there are people in the audience who are not familiar with Turkey and who do not know where these cities are, here's a map of Turkey, and Diyarbakir and Batman are located here in the southeastern part of the map. This whole region, eastern and southeastern Anatolia, is where majority of Kurds in Turkey live. And Kurds comprise around 15 to 20% of Turkey's overall population of 85 million. We don't have exact data on this, as official surveys do not ask about ethnicity, but non-official surveys and also educated guesses give us this number of 15 to 20%. And in addition to this region, Istanbul here also hosts a large population of Kurds. Hence my choice of Batman, Diyarbakir, and Istanbul as cities to conduct research in. So I conducted the interviews during a period when the peace process seemed to be moving smoothly and when core religiosity seemed to be quite influential in bridging the ethnic divide between Kurds and Turks, at least rhetorically. The interview data revealed that, in fact, Sunni Muslim identity was far from influential in uniting religious elites at the time, let alone motivating them to advocate for Muslim fraternity. One of the main reasons why Sunni Islam has failed to unite Turkish and Kurdish Sunni Muslim elites, I argue, is the variation in how these elites conceptualize religious and ethnic identities. Almost all religious elites I talk with agreed that Islam can be implemented as a conflict resolution tool. Yet, because they diverge in their interpretations of Islamic teachings and in their conceptualizations of religious and ethnic identities, Islam played much less an influential role as a peacemaker. To demonstrate this divergence among Turkish and Kurdish religious elites, based on my findings, I developed the concept of religio-ethnic identity, and I put forward a fourfold typology of identity categories as conceived by these elites. So first is religio-ethnic, the second category is ethno-religious, The third one is religious, and the fourth one is secular ethnic. And you see here on the screen this table where I give more detail about these identity types. And I will explain all these categories in a bit with sample quotes to exemplify them, to highlight what I'm referring to. I think they will become much clearer with quotes from these elites that I interviewed. Okay, so because these categories cannot be considered in isolation from the evolution of certain ideas and institutions since the late Ottoman period, structural changes the political and religious fields have undergone in Turkey since 2002, and the repercussions these changes have had on various actors, I claim that different identity categories, along with institutional and political changes, and the ensuing transformation of power and network relations, prevent Islam from acting as a unifying conflict resolution tool in the Kurdish conflict. Blending interview data with historical institutional analysis and secondary sources, I demonstrate the symbiotic relationship between the changes in Turkey's religious and political fields and the religious elites' conceptualizations of religious and ethnic identities. To that end, I employ this theoretical framework that attends to not only micro-level identity formation processes or macro-level doctrinal debates, but also a meso-level analysis of religious and political actors and how in their hands theological contents might change shape. In this presentation, I do not go much into theory, but I would be happy to answer any theory-related questions during the Q&A. Building on these findings and using the fourfold typology, in the book, I first explain the secular ethnic category in chapter 1. So with the help of interview data, I display how secular Kurdish political elites envision ethnicity as a category completely detached from religion, and how they deem as assimilatory the AKP's attempt to use religion as a unifying tool. The chapter opens with the analogy of green Kemalism, used by some Kurdish political elites to criticize the AKP's Muslim fraternity project. This line of thinking claims that the AKP is no different than the founders of the Turkish Republic in its intention to assimilate Kurds, and that it differs from the latter only in its employment of religion to that end, hence the allusion to green. Here is a quote from an HDP official I talked to in Diyarbakir, and HDP stands for the Pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, the third largest party in the parliament. So I read the quote now. Kurds in general have a quite positive attitude towards Islam, yet Islam has always been used as a tool of assimilation and oppression against the Kurds. Whether in the form of Turkish Islamic, Arab Islamic, or Persian Islamic syntheses, those in power have always employed Islam to exterminate or dominate Kurds. That's why Kurds embrace a critical view of state Islam. AKP officials claim to be religious, but in practice, they are far from that. Civil Friday prayers symbolize the Kurds' attempt to practice their religion without giving up their own culture and language. That's why the state finds them disturbing. By banning them, the state is saying, either embrace my interpretation of religion, or I will not let you practice any other version of religion. In the past, here another quote, when it comes to Kurdish demands, socialists have ignored the main tenets of socialism, while Islamists have ignored the main tenets of the Muslim Ummah. Neither socialism nor the Ummah rejects the concept of a nation or the attempt to preserve and improve a nation's well-being. They reject negative nationalism. In this sense, there is continuity in the way the state has handled Kurdish demands. The hunters might have changed, but the prey has remained the same. In the past, it was the Ittihad Terakki originating Kemalists who tried to assimilate Kurds. Nowadays, it's the Islamists who ironically take pride in removing Kemalists from power. In my eyes, these Islamists are nothing but green Kemalists. So as you can see here, this emphasis on historical continuity and how secular Kurdish elites actually see this continuity from even the late Ottoman times. And they think that the assimilation of Kurds has been an ongoing attempt for more than a century, and what has changed is just the actors on the ground, they claim. And in chapter 2, then I turn my gaze to the supranational religious identity and scrutinize the contours of the Muslim unity project. Through interview data, this chapter demonstrates how the belief in Islam as cement comes to life in the discourses of several religious elites who, regardless of their ethnicity, characterize Sunni Islam as an overarching supranational identity and see Muslim fraternity as the only solution to this conflict. Citing certain hadiths and verses from the Quran, they reproduce the belief that Sunni Islam could indeed bridge the ethnic divide between Kurds and Turks. Here's a quote from an interview I conducted with a state-appointed imam in Diyarbakir. I think the only way out of this deadlock is an emphasis on our common Muslim identity. The Quran asks us to make peace between our brothers. That's what we should do. We should find a common ground with the help of Islam. We believe in the same God. We believe in the same prophet. We fought shoulder to shoulder in the War of Independence to save this country from non-Muslim invaders. So what is it that we cannot share now? Why this fight? We need to remind ourselves that we are Muslim brothers and sisters. So you can see how much emphasis he puts on Muslim unity. And although this approach did not have that many followers among my respondents, only 7 out of 62, it's still worth scrutinizing in detail as it provides the basis of the main research question I'm dealing with, namely the role of Islam as a supranational identity. Hence, in this chapter, I try to provide a better understanding of the origins of this approach and how and why it came to be embraced by the AKP. Here's another quote by another interviewee, a longtime member of a religious non-governmental organization in Batman. After telling me about the murders conducted in Batman by the Kurdish Hezbollah, a Batman-originated radical Islamic group, the PKK and the state in the 1990s, he becomes silent and lost in his thoughts. I'm used to this because Batman is a deeply wounded city. Almost all of my interviews in Batman were clouded by the gloomy memories of the 1990s when the conflict between not only the Turkish state and the PKK, but also between the PKK and the Hezbollah reached its peak. And despite all he has witnessed, he still believes that Islam could be the only way out. And he said, Turks and Kurds are united in Islam. Islam is the strongest link between us. That's what kept us together when the Ottoman Empire dissolved. Hence, we should cling to it. Allah warns us against Shiism. In Quran, he clearly asks us to not become divided. Hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether and do not become divided. He cites this verse from the Quran. And remember the favor of Allah upon you when you were enemies, and he brought your hearts together and you became by his favor brothers. There is only one nation for me, and that's the nation of Abraham. So to provide some historical context, the chapter then goes on to analyze this discourse in relation to the Muslim Ummah and Ottoman pan-Islamism, and demonstrates that rather than Muslim unity, Muslim disunity was the rule from the very beginning in Islamic history. The reason some of my respondents think that implementing Islam as an overarching supranational identity might help unify Sunni Kurds and Sunni Turks lies in their nostalgic take on the Ottoman Caliphate. According to this account, the Ottomans handled the ethnic differences between Kurds and Turks much better because they implemented Islam as a unifying identity. In assessing the validity of this claim, the book scrutinizes the Ottoman Caliphate through a detailed historical narrative. Upon further inquiry, one realizes that this supposition is correct only to a certain extent. While Islam played a great role in unifying Ottoman Muslims against the empire's non-Muslim subjects, even the Ottomans were forced to recognize the ethnic differences among their Muslim subjects. As such, although Islam was a powerful bond between the Muslim subjects of the Ottoman Empire, it was still limited in its ability to suppress ethnic differences, let alone form a unified ummah. This nostalgia for a peaceful Ottoman past in which different ethnic groups lived in harmony also constitutes the core of the AKP's insistence on presenting Islam as the solution to the Kurdish conflict. In the last section of the chapter, building on systematic analysis of statements by AKP cadres, mostly by President Erdogan, I demonstrate how the AKP came to embrace a pan-Islamic solution to the Kurdish conflict, what steps it took towards accomplishing it, and how its attitude towards Kurds compares to that of Ottomans towards its Muslim subjects. Erdogan's Muslim Turkish citizenship was way too reminiscent of Abdülhamid II's Muslim Ottoman citizenship. Just like Abdülhamid II, Erdogan rejected a secular understanding of citizenship, and swapping Ottoman with Turkish, he envisioned a Turkish citizenship that includes all the different ethnic groups living in Turkey as long as they are Sunni Muslims. However, AKP's approach and this conceptualization of a unifying Muslim identity has not been successful in the end, as the peace talks and negotiations were shattered in 2015. In Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, I present religio-ethnic and ethno-religious identities as important reasons for the failure of the Muslim Unity Project. Chapter 3 introduces religio-ethnic identity via a focus on Civil Friday prayers as contentious performances. Following the lead of Peter Berger, who in The Sacred Canopy described religion as both a world-maintaining and a world-shaking force capable of legitimating or challenging power, it provides an overview of how the institutional and policy changes introduced during the AKP rule made possible the employment of Islam as a tool of resistance in the hands of Civil Friday prayer imams. Building on interviews with these imams, as well as observations from Friday prayers, this chapter draws attention to the imams as autonomous agents of contestation who have turned religion from a tool of assimilation into a tool of nonviolent resistance. Though acknowledging Islam's capacity to unite, these imams were quite suspicious of the Muslim unity discourse. By quoting Quranic verses and hadiths that highlight ethnicity as a religious, God-given identity, they claim that rejecting one's Kurdish identity and assimilating into Turkish culture means going against God's will. Hence, rather than the ethno-religious approach, these imams promote a religio-ethnic identity which traces the origins of ethno-national identity back to religious identity. As such, religio-ethnic identity functions as an important reason for the weakness of Islam as a unifying identity in Turkey. And here I read the quote, "As the Quran shows clearly, our ethnicity is God-given, it's innate. One can change one's religion, but not ethnicity. If God wanted, he could have created us all the same, but he didn't. And he presents the variety of languages and ethnic identities as proofs of his existence." And these are the three verses that they cite when supporting their argument from the Quran. Other quotes from the interviews that I made with Kurdish clerics, the Prophet has made it clear that no race, no ethnicity can have superiority over another except by piety. What makes the Turks think that they are superior to us? Turkish Muslims keep saying we are religious brethren. However, in their eyes, we are brothers so long as they are the elder brother. I believe that standing up for my ethnic identity is something that my religion commands me to do. I cannot differentiate between the two and prioritize one over the other. And lastly, in Chapter 4, I present the ethno-religious identity and argue that another reason the idea of Muslim unity does not work well in the Kurdish conflict is the strength of Turkish nationalism among Turkish religious elites. Through interview data, this chapter displays how Turkish religious elites who seemingly advocate Islamic unity end up privileging Turkish ethnic identity upon further interrogation. While they discursively promote Muslim unity, in practice, they advocate a Muslim identity very much shaped by Turkish nationalism. The elites in this category are usually comprised of state-appointed Turkish imams and some Turkish Muslim elites, especially those associated with the Gülen movement, And instead of talking about ethnicity as a God-given identity, they focus on the chronic differences between negative and positive nationalisms. And they claim that most of the Kurdish imams practice negative nationalism, which is forbidden in Islamic teachings. To back their argument up, they usually refer to Quranic verses that emphasize the brotherhood of Muslims. And here on this slide, you see a quote by a state-appointed imam in Diyarbakir. The only nationalism Islam accepts is positive nationalism, which emphasizes the brotherhood of all Muslims. It sees all Muslims as equal, and it does not distinguish between them. Hence, what we need to do is to establish a Muslim union. The question is, which country can establish and lead such a union? None of the Arab states can do it. Indonesia, Iran, or Pakistan can't do it either. Only Turks can accomplish this because they actually ruled the Muslim world for 600 years. Alludes to the Ottomans here. And here's another quote by a Turkish Gülen movement member. We are one single body. Turks comprise our mind, while Kurds comprise our strength and courage. We should act together. We should not get divided. If we do, then we will be defeated. Let me give you an example. Back in the day, Muslim armies were making plans to conquer a particular city. The Kurds said, let's go conquer it now. The Turks said, no, let's wait for a suitable time. And the Arabs kept silent. Eventually, they all listened to the Turks, waited for the suitable time, and ended up conquering the city. This is why Kurds and Turks need each other. Left to themselves, the Kurds are not even able to elect a village headman. Rumor has it that in one village, 60 Kurds killed each other during local elections. So as you can see, he starts by an emphasis on Muslim unity, but as he progresses, one can see how he prioritizes Turkishness and looks down upon Kurds. With the help of a historical overview, the chapter then explains in detail how this attitude and the endurance of Turkish nationalism among Turkish Muslims has its roots in the formation of the Turkish nation-state as a Sunni Muslim entity. It then turns its gaze to the Turkish Islamic synthesis and goes back as early as the mid-19th century to trace the emergence of Turkish nationalism and its merger with Islam. The second part of the chapter scrutinizes how the AKP's discourse on the Kurdish conflict has oscillated from one characterized by Islamic Turkish synthesis to one characterized by Turkish Islamic synthesis. Through a systematic analysis of newspapers and public statements, it documents how the AKP has replaced its emphasis on Muslim fraternity with an emphasis on Turkish Muslim nationalism. So while the different conceptualizations of ethnic and religious identities by Sunni Muslim Turkish and Kurdish elites have definitely played an important role in preventing their unification under the umbrella of Sunni Islam, it would be misleading to claim that it is the only reason that has hindered the deployment of religion as a peacemaker in Turkey's Kurdish conflict. As identity categories do not exist in a vacuum and they are historically and politically grounded, I contend that related structural factors should also be taken into consideration when discussing this issue. The spillover effects of the civil war in Syria, especially the establishment of an autonomous Kurdish region, Rojava, in northern Syria, the historical trajectories of both Kurdish and Turkish nationalisms in Turkey, the non-transparent nature of the peace talks, and the continuous mistrust between the government and the Kurdish movement, the vital role played by secular nationalist actors both in the Kurdish movement and in some segments of the Kurdish and Turkish society, the importance of Alevi Kurds in certain Kurdish majority regions and in the upper echelons of the Kurdish movement, and last but not least, the HDP's decision to not support Erdogan's bid for presidency are among the factors that have all contributed to the termination of the peace process in the summer of 2015. And you can see here how the peace process actually failed. This is the timeline of the most important events as I see it. And up until March 2015, it looked like the peace process was actually proceeding successfully and that it will culminate in a long-lasting peace agreement. However, that didn't happen. And in July 2015, the ceasefire was broken. And in January 2016, Erdogan declared that they will no longer be in touch with the terrorist organization nor with its political party, alluding to the HDP. That project is over. And since then, the HDP has been very much the target of several repressive attacks. And in such an environment, it was quite hard for Sunni Islam to act as the cement it was envisioned to be, I claim. So thank you all so much for listening to me. I very much look forward to your questions and comments.